She accidentally slept on the mafia boss's shoulder. What happened mid-flight left her shocked. The fluorescent lights of Chicago O'Hare's Terminal 3 at 11 o'clock at night were a special kind of hell. They hummed a high, whining frequency that drilled directly into Evelyn Brooks's temples, amplifying the headache that had been building for the last 72 hours. She was running on fumes, the dregs of a lukewarm, bitter coffee, and the fragile, paper-thin hope that this one interview would change everything. Evelyn clutched the strap of her shoulder bag, the faux leather cracked and peeling at the bend. Inside was her portfolio, her entire life, meticulously arranged, and a one-way ticket to New York. Not one way because she was optimistic, but because she couldn't afford a return flight. If she didn't get this job at Ethelred Stone, the most prestigious interior design firm on the East Coast, she would be flying back to her tiny Midwestern town in shame, with money she'd have to borrow from her mother. And her mother, with her mounting medical bills and quiet, proud suffering, was the reason Evelyn was doing this. She was exhausted, not just missed a good night's sleep tired. This was a deep, bone-weary exhaustion, the kind that came from working 2 jobs, a day shift at a fabric warehouse and a night shift bartending, all while polishing her design plates until her fingers were raw. She had saved for 6 months for this single trip. We are now boarding all rows for Flight 227A, with non-stop service to LaGuardia. A cheerful, disembodied voice announced. Evelyn shuffled forward, her ankle twisting slightly in the cheap heels she'd worn to look professional. She handed her crumpled boarding pass to the gate agent, who barely looked at her. The agent's eyes flicked from the pass to her screen, and she frowned. A tap, tap, tap of long, acrylic nails on the keyboard. Evelyn's stomach plummeted. "Please, no, don't be canceled. Don't be delayed." "Miss Brooks," the agent said, finally looking up. Her smile was aggressively professional. "It looks like we've had a last-minute change. We had to move you." "Move me?" Evelyn's voice was a croak. "Is there a problem?" "Not for you," the agent chirped, printing a new card. "The flight was overbooked in economy. We're upgrading you to first class, seat 2B. Have a wonderful flight." Evelyn stared at the new ticket. First class. It felt like a mistake, like a prank the universe was playing on her. She stumbled down the jet bridge, her mind foggy, and stepped onto the plane. The air was different up here. It was quiet. The carpet was plusher, the lighting softer. A flight attendant, exuding calm elegance, smiled at her. "Welcome." "Can I take your coat, Miss?" Evelyn, flustered, handed over her thin, worn pea coat, feeling a flush of embarrassment as it hung next to a row of cashmere overcoats and sleek, dark blazers. She found her seat, 2B, a window seat. It was less a seat and more a personal pod, a cocoon of soft gray leather and polished wood. She sank into it, the cushion sighing around her. This was a world she designed for, a world of quiet luxury and understated wealth, but it was a world she had never, ever been allowed to touch. A man was already seated in the aisle seat, 2C. He hadn't looked up when she sat down. He was reading, not a tablet or a phone, but a heavy, leather-bound book. He was stillness personified. He was... Evelyn registered with a distant, clinical part of her brain, breathtaking. He was not handsome in the bright, easy way of movie stars. This was something else. His features were severe, carved from granite, a strong jaw, a straight, aristocratic nose, and a mouth that looked like it had never formed a casual smile. His hair was jet black, cut short and severe. He wore a suit that was so dark it was almost black, tailored so perfectly it seemed to have been sewn onto his frame. It didn't shout money, it whispered power. She caught his scent as she settled in, a clean, sharp smell of sandalwood and something faintly metallic, like cold steel. He turned a page, the only sound the soft shush of expensive paper. Evelyn buckled her seatbelt, her hands fumbling. She felt large and clumsy next to him, a sparrow next to a hawk. She turned her face to the window, watching the baggage handlers toss luggage in the rain, and willed her heartbeat to slow down. The flight attendant offered pre-departure champagne. Evelyn, terrified of doing the wrong thing, just asked for water. Her seatmate didn't ask for anything. He just kept reading. The plane took off, a smooth, powerful ascent that pressed her back into the buttery leather. The exhaustion, held at bay by adrenaline and anxiety, came roaring back. The cabin lights dimmed. The low, thrumming hum of the engines was a lullaby. Evelyn's eyelids grew heavy. She fought it. She tried to review her interview questions in her head. What is your design philosophy? To create spaces that are warm. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Not here. Her head nodded once, twice. She jerked awake, embarrassed. The man next to her was still reading, seemingly unaware. She turned back to the window. The darkness outside was absolute. The hum of the engines was hypnotic. Her body, finally safe and supported in the most comfortable chair she'd ever sat in, betrayed her. Her mind let go. Her neck relaxed, her head lolled to the side, a slow, inevitable tilt, until it came to rest on the solid, unyielding surface of her neighbor's shoulder. Dominic Moretti went rigid. His entire life was a fortress built on one principle: never be touched, never be vulnerable. His instincts, honed by 2 decades of navigating a world of blood and betrayal, screamed at him to shove the woman off. His hand, resting on the armrest, had already tensed, his fingers curling, ready to react. But he didn't. He had noticed her when she boarded. He noticed everything. He saw the cheap coat, the worn-down heels, the portfolio clutched like a shield, and the sheer, desperate exhaustion in her eyes. She was a civilian. She was insignificant. Now, her head was on his shoulder. He could feel the fine, soft strands of her hair against his neck. She smelled faintly of lavender soap and, underneath that, the simple, clean scent of a woman. There was no perfume, no artifice. He turned his head, just slightly. In the dim cabin light, her face was completely unguarded. Her brow was furrowed, even in sleep, as if her worries followed her into her dreams. Her mouth was soft, slightly parted. A small, vulnerable sigh escaped her. He was startled, not by the contact, but by his own lack of reaction. Any other person, a rival, an associate, even a family member, and his armor would have been up. But this was nothing. It was a stray cat, a bird with a broken wing. It was innocence. He couldn't remember the last time he had been this close to someone so utterly uncalculated. A strange, unfamiliar feeling settled in his chest. It wasn't pity. It was curiosity. He looked back at his book, but the words on the page had stopped making sense. He did not move. He let her sleep. For an hour, Dominic Moretti, the heir to the most powerful crime family in New York, sat perfectly still, a statue of bespoke wool, and allowed a stranger to use him as a pillow. The jolt was sudden and violent. It was not gentle turbulence. It was as if the plane had been punched from below. The entire cabin dropped, and for a terrifying second, everyone was weightless. Evelyn was ripped from sleep with a strangled gasp. She was falling. Her body reacted before her mind, her hands lashing out to find purchase, to stop the fall. She grabbed the first solid thing she could find, her hands splayed wide, one landing on a bicep as hard as packed earth, the other flat against a broad, solid chest. She felt the crisp cotton of a shirt, the thick weave of a suit jacket, and underneath it, the shocking, solid warmth of a living, breathing man. She felt the heavy, steady thump-thump of his heart under her palm. The plane stabilized, shuddering. The captain's voice came on, tinny and strained with false calm. "Apologies for that, folks. Just hit an unexpected air pocket. We'll have the seatbelt sign on for the remainder of the flight." Evelyn's brain caught up, the warmth under her hands. The sandalwood scent, the man. She recoiled as if she'd been burned. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I fell asleep, and the turbulence. I didn't mean. I'm so sorry." Her words were a mortified jumble, her face burning hot. Dominic didn't look at her. His gaze had snapped from his book to the aisle, his entire body thrumming with a different kind of energy. He hadn't even flinched at the turbulence. He was scanning. His eyes narrowed, missing nothing. The turbulence was a distraction. It was cover and right on cue. It happened. A man, silver-haired and distinguished, who had been in the seat behind them, was suddenly in the aisle, stumbling as if thrown by the jolt. A flight attendant, also off balance, was right beside him, holding a tray with 2 drinks. "My apologies," the silver-haired man said, his voice smooth. He bumped into the flight attendant, and in the chaos, his hand, holding his own empty glass, darted toward the tray. Dominic saw it all in fractions of a second. The stumble was practiced. The man's eyes were not on the flight attendant. They were on the glass of scotch on her tray. His glass of scotch, it was a classic switch, a poison attempt, amateurish in its execution, but deadly if it worked. Dominic's hand moved, ready to intercept, to break the man's wrist. But before he could, Evelyn, still flustered and trying to make amends for her own lapse, spoke up. "Oh, careful," she said, her voice clear in the suddenly tense cabin. She was speaking to the flight attendant. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry, but I think he just took your other drink. I mean, the other gentleman's drink. I think that was his." She pointed a trembling finger. "His was the one with no ice. The one you have now has ice in it. I noticed." She trailed off, blushing, as if she'd overstepped. The cabin froze. The silver-haired man, his hand holding Dominic's scotch, stopped. The flight attendant looked at the glass in her hand, then at the glass in his, confused. "Oh, you're right. This one has ice." Dominic's eyes met the assassin's. The man knew. The man knew he knew. The civilian, the girl, had just blown the entire operation with a single, innocent observation. The assassin's face, for a split second, was a mask of cold fury. Then, just as quickly, it was gone. He smiled, a thin, reptilian smile. "My apologies, so clumsy of me. Must have been the turbulence." He handed the scotch back to the flight attendant and retreated to the lavatory. He didn't return to his seat. Dominic let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. He looked at the woman beside him. She was staring at her lap, her hands knotted together, still mortified by her own behavior, completely oblivious to what she had just done. She was no longer an insignificant curiosity. She was a liability. She had seen the man's face, and the man had seen hers. But she was also, unexpectedly, an asset. She was observant. She saw things others missed, not because she was trained, but because she was present. He needed to control the situation. He caught the eye of the head flight attendant and gave a subtle, sharp nod toward the galley. The attendant, a consummate professional, came over instantly. "Is everything all right, sir?" she murmured. "No," Dominic said, his voice a low, private rumble that Evelyn couldn't hear. "The man who just went to the lavatory? He's a security threat. I need you to have law enforcement meet the flight." The attendant's eyes widened. "Furthermore," Dominic continued, his voice like ice, "the woman next to me is now a witness. She is with me. When we land, I need her disembarkation rerouted. She's not to go to the main terminal. My personal security will meet us at the gate. Is that understood?" The flight attendant, recognizing a tone of absolute authority that had nothing to do with a first-class ticket, simply nodded. "Yes, sir. Of course. Sir." Evelyn, meanwhile, just wanted to disappear. The rest of the flight was a blur of silent tension. The man next to her had returned to his book, but he wasn't reading. She could feel the coiled energy coming off him in waves. He was a predator, and she had fallen asleep on him. When the plane finally touched down at LaGuardia, she was a bundle of raw nerves. The interview, the man, the turbulence, the weird drink thing. She just wanted to grab her bag, find the nearest taxi, and disappear into the New York City anonymity. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have just arrived." Evelyn was already gathering her purse, ready to make a break for it. But as the ding sounded and passengers began to stand, the man next to her put a hand on the armrest, blocking her in. He didn't look at her. "Wait." That was all. One word. A moment later, an announcement came over the intercom. "Would passenger Evelyn Brooks please remain in her seat until all other passengers have deplaned? A gate agent will be by to assist you." Evelyn's blood ran cold. "What? Why? Did I do something wrong?" Dominic finally turned to look at her. His eyes were dark, unreadable, and held a depth that frightened her. "They are providing a courtesy service." "A courtesy service? I don't need that. I need to get to my hotel." She was starting to panic. This wasn't right. They waited in suffocating silence as the rest of the plane emptied. Finally, the head flight attendant returned, her smile tight. "Miss Brooks, if you'll come with me." Evelyn, grabbing her bag, followed the attendant up the jet bridge, but instead of leading to the terminal, the attendant opened a side door marked private and gestured for her to go through. She stepped out into a small, sterile waiting area. 2 men were standing there. They were built like refrigerators and wore the same dark, impeccably tailored suits as the man on the plane. They were not smiling. "Miss Evelyn Brooks?" the first man said. His voice was polite, but his eyes were flat. "We're here to provide your VIP processing." "VIP processing? I didn't order any." "I think there's been a mistake." Evelyn backed away, her hand fumbling for the door. "I just need to get to baggage claim." "That's been handled, ma'am," the second man said, stepping smoothly to her side. "Please, come with us. The car is waiting." This was not right. This was not a courtesy service. This was an abduction. "No," Evelyn's voice was high with fear. "Let me go. I don't know who you are. Help." She tried to bolt, but the men just shifted, blocking her path. They didn't even touch her. They didn't have to. "There is no need to make a scene. Miss Brooks." The voice came from behind her. Dominic. He had emerged from a private lounge, his coat now draped over his arm, his expression one of bored patience. "You!" Evelyn spun around, her fear momentarily eclipsed by anger. "Who are you? What is this? Tell them to let me go." He walked toward her, his footsteps silent on the industrial carpet. He stopped a few feet away, but the intensity of his presence seemed to suck all the air out of the small room. "I cannot do that," he said, his voice calm and low. "This is kidnapping. I'll scream. I'll call the police." "You will do nothing," he said. He wasn't angry. He was just stating a fact. "You are coming with me. It is for your safety." "My safety? I'm safer with a taxi driver. I don't even know you." "And yet," he said, taking a step closer, "you are alive because I was sitting next to you, and I am alive because you were. That creates a complication." He nodded to his men. One of them gently took her arm. Evelyn tried to yank it away, but the grip was like a steel trap. She was being herded, moved against her will, down a private elevator and into a sterile parking garage. A black armored sedan was idling, its lights cutting through the concrete gloom. They put her in the back. Dominic slid in opposite her, facing her. The doors closed with the heavy, final thud of a bank vault. The car began to move. Evelyn was trembling, half from terror, half from rage. The city lights blurred past the tinted windows, a world away. "You can't just take me," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I have an interview. My whole life. You're ruining everything." She lunged for the door handle. It didn't move. Dominic's hand shot out, not violently, but with a speed that defied logic. He didn't grab her. He placed his hand flat on the seat, covering her wrist, trapping it against the leather. His skin was warm, the grip was impossibly gentle, yet it held the absolute, unmovable promise of strength. She couldn't have pulled away if she'd tried. He leaned forward. The space in the car shrank to nothing. All she could see were his eyes, black and deep in the shadows. All she could smell was that scent of sandalwood and steel. He murmured, his voice so quiet it was barely a breath, but it cut through her panic like a knife. "You don't know who you just saved." His gaze dropped to her trapped wrist, then rose back to her eyes. "And you have no idea what you just stepped into." The sedan moved through the city with an unnatural smoothness, a black shark gliding through a river of yellow taxis. Evelyn's wrist was still pinned to the seat, not by pressure, but by his sheer, immovable presence. His words echoed in the silence. "You have no idea what you just stepped into." He was right. She had no idea. But the terror that had frozen her in the airport was beginning to thaw, replaced by a cold, simmering anger. She was not a damsel. She was a woman who had fought for every scrap in her life, and she would not be manhandled, no matter how quietly, by a man in a suit that cost more than her mother's hospital bills. She took a deep breath, pulling her chin up. "Please," she said, her voice admirably steady. "Let go of my wrist." Dominic's eyes held hers for a long, heavy second. He hadn't been applying pressure, but she felt the release as a sudden absence of warmth. He retracted his hand, clasping it with his other over his knee. "Where are you taking me?" she demanded. "Somewhere safe." His voice was a low, even rumble, blending with the sound of the engine. "Safe," she repeated, the word tasting like ash. "I was safe in my apartment in Chicago. I was safe before I sat next to you. This," she gestured around the opulent, leather-lined prison, "is not safe." He didn't reply. He simply watched her, his expression unreadable. It was this stillness, this absolute, unnerving calm, that frightened her more than any threat. He was a man accustomed to getting his way, not by shouting, but by the sheer, unbending force of his will. The car didn't go to a police station. It didn't go to a brightly lit public hotel. It pulled into a subterranean private garage. The entrance, a discreet, unmarked steel door that blended into the granite facade of a towering, pre-war building. One of the men, the one who had driven, got out and opened her door. Evelyn's heart hammered. "I'm not getting out." Dominic, who had exited his side, simply waited. "Yes, you are. You can't make me." "I can," he said, his voice devoid of malice, which made the statement even more terrifying. "But I would prefer not to. The men who tried to kill me on that flight, they are not polite. They are not reasonable. They saw you. You saw them. You are now a loose end. I am a man who does not like loose ends. Please, get out of the car. Get..." His please was not a request. It was the velvet glove over the iron fist. Shivering, Evelyn slid out. The air was cold, but the garage was spotless. They were led to a private elevator, all brushed bronze and dark, polished mahogany. Dominic used a key, not a card, a heavy, old-fashioned brass key, to operate it. The elevator ascended with a whisper, opening directly into a room that stole her breath. It wasn't a room. It was an entire floor, a penthouse suite that was larger than her entire apartment building back home. The front door of the elevator opened onto an expanse of gleaming hardwood, and beyond that, a wall of glass that looked out over the entirety of Central Park. The lights of the city glittered below them, a diamond carpet tossed at their feet. The furniture was minimalist, expensive and perfect. "What is this place?" she whispered, her anger momentarily forgotten, replaced by sheer awe. This was the world she dreamed of designing. "A place to think," Dominic said from behind her. He walked past her, shrugging off his suit jacket and tossing it over a chair, in his shirt sleeves, with the stark white cotton pulling taut across his shoulders. He looked less like a businessman and more like a brawler. "It's a holding of my family's. No one knows I use it." Evelyn stayed by the elevator, her bag still clutched to her chest. "I want to go home." He stopped, his back to her, as he poured a glass of water from a crystal decanter. "I know. I have an interview tomorrow morning. At Ethelred and Stone. It's at 9. He turned, the glass in his hand. "It's the most important thing in your life right now." It wasn't a question. Yes, it is. "I will have my driver take you back to the airport in the morning. I'll arrange a private flight. You can be home by noon." He took a sip of water. Evelyn stared at him. No, I'm not. I'm not just leaving. I spent my last dollar on this trip. I'm not going home. I'm going to that interview." Dominic studied her. A flicker of something, surprise, respect, in his dark eyes. "You're not listening," he said, setting the glass down. "You were a witness to an attempted murder. My murder. The man on the plane, the one you so helpfully pointed out. He works for people who do not forgive mistakes, and they do not tolerate witnesses. If you walk out that door, you might make it to your interview. You might even get the job, but you will not live to see your first paycheck." The blood drained from her face. "You're lying. You're just trying to scare me. You're insane." "Am I?" He walked toward her, his pace unhurried. He stopped an arm's length away. His name was Antonio Russo, the man on the plane. He's a specialist. He uses a derivative of aconitine. It induces a heart attack within 5 minutes. It's untraceable unless the coroner knows exactly what to look for. By the time the flight landed, I would have been dead, and the crew would have chalked it up to a simple, tragic medical event. Evelyn was shaking. This was too detailed, too real. He failed. Dominic continued, his voice dropping. And you are the reason why. They will see you as my accomplice, or worse, they will see you as a new, unknown asset. Either way, they will want to talk to you, and their methods of interrogation are thorough. So no, Miss Brooks, I am not flying you home as a punishment. I am offering it as a way to save your life. Go home, forget this, forget me. She looked into his eyes, searching for any sign of deception, and found none. She saw only a cold, hard certainty. He believed every word he was saying. I can't, she whispered, her voice breaking. My mom, she's sick, the medical bills. This job wasn't just a job. It was everything. It was the only way out. Dominic's expression, that mask of granite, softened almost imperceptibly. The line of his jaw eased. The world is not a fair place. No, she said, a raw, bitter laugh escaping her. It's not. A long silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant hum of the city. Evelyn, defeated and overwhelmed, let her bag slip from her fingers. It hit the floor with a soft thump. So what happens now? She asked. Now, he said, turning away. You are my guest. There is a bedroom down the hall. Second door on the left. The bathroom is stocked. I will have some food sent up. And you? I will be here, ensuring you are safe. He glanced at her. Go, get some rest. You look tired. He was right. The adrenaline was gone, leaving behind a crushing weariness. She was too exhausted to fight anymore. She picked up her bag, her cheap, worn bag against the backdrop of this billion-dollar view, and walked down the hall. The bedroom was a masterpiece of quiet luxury, soft gray walls, a bed that looked like a cloud, and another wall of glass. She didn't even look. She just fell onto the bed, still in her rumpled flight clothes, and was asleep in seconds. She woke up hours later. The city outside was no longer glittering. It was washed in the pre-dawn gray, the time when the city is at its most quiet, its most honest. Her body ached, her neck was stiff, and her mind was a fog of confusion. She couldn't sleep. The day's events replayed in her mind, the man's hand switching the glass, Dominic's sudden, cold authority, the two men in the garage. She padded out of the bedroom, her feet silent on the cold hardwood. The main room was dark, save for the city lights, and he was there. He hadn't moved. He was sitting in an armchair, facing the window, a dark silhouette against the emerging skyline. He was still in his shirt sleeves, but his tie was gone, and the top 2 buttons of his shirt were undone, revealing a sliver of his throat. She must have made a sound, because his head turned. He wasn't asleep. He'd been watching the city wake up. You're awake, he said. It wasn't a question. I couldn't sleep. She wrapped her arms around herself. Suddenly cold, he rose, a fluid, powerful movement. I'll make you some tea. She followed him into the kitchen, which was a sleek stainless steel and marble affair that looked like it had never been used. He moved with an incongruous, domestic grace, opening cabinets, filling a kettle, finding a box of tea. It was a simple, herbal blend. He handed her a steaming mug, his fingers brushing hers. A jolt, like a small, static shock, passed between them. She pulled her hand back quickly. Thank you, she murmured. They stood in the kitchen, two strangers in a borrowed penthouse, as the sky turned from gray to a pale, bruised lavender. Why are you being so kind? She asked, the hot ceramic warming her hands. He leaned back against the counter, crossing his arms. It made his chest and shoulders look impossibly broad. I'm not kind, Evelyn, I am practical. You are a problem I have to manage. That's not what I mean. You didn't have to tell me the truth. You could have just, I don't know, locked me in here. I am a businessman, he said, his voice flat. I deal in transactions. You saved my life. I am now saving yours. It's a simple ledger. It's balanced. A businessman, she said, testing the word. The men who work for you, they're not just employees, are they? He was silent. And the men who tried to kill you, she pressed, emboldened by the strange, liminal hour. They're not just business competitors. Who are you? Dominic looked down into his own empty mug. My family. We are in the import and export business. We have holdings in shipping, construction, and logistics. It's an old business. It comes with complications. Enemies my grandfather made. Enemies my father made. Enemies I have made. He was omitting everything. He was telling her the truth, but a slanted, curated version of it. The mafia part, the crime part, he left that in the shadows. So you're, what, the CEO? A small, mirthless smile touched his lips for a fraction of a second. Something like that. He looked at her, his gaze intense, as if he was seeing her for the first time. What about you, the designer from a small town? Why New York? Why Ethelred and Stone? And so, in the quiet of a New York dawn, she told him. She told him about her mother, about the multiple sclerosis, about the medical bills that piled up like snowdrifts, suffocating them. She told him about her talent, the one thing she knew she was good at, and how she'd scrimped and saved for this one. Desperate shot at a life where she could finally take care of the woman who had always taken care of her. She spoke of her dreams, not of penthouses and wealth, but of simply being able to breathe, to not be afraid of the first of every month. He listened. He didn't interrupt. He just watched her, his dark eyes absorbing her vulnerability, her honesty, her quiet strength. When she finished, her voice thick with unshed tears, the silence was heavy, but not uncomfortable. You're a good daughter, he said, his voice rough. I'm just a desperate one. He shook his head, pushing off the counter. My father. He forced me into this world. I was 17. I had other plans. I wanted to be an architect. He let out a short, harsh laugh. I wanted to build things instead. I manage his complications. I long for normalcy. For a single day where I'm not looking over my shoulder, a day where I'm just a man, not a name, not a legacy. His honesty, though just as curated as his, touched her. He was trapped, just like her, in a different, gilded cage, but trapped nonetheless. The tension in the room had shifted. It was no longer the static of fear. It was something else, a low thrum, an awareness. He was no longer just her captor. She was no longer just his problem. Evelyn, on an impulse she couldn't explain, reached out and put her hand on his forearm. His skin was warm. The muscle beneath was rigid. I'm sorry, she whispered. His head snapped up. His gaze fell to her hand, then to her face. He didn't move. She should have pulled away, but she didn't. She felt that strange, dangerous pull. He was sitting in the armchair again, the sun now fully risen, casting golden light across the floor. She was standing in front of him, her empty mug still in her hand. You should get some more rest, he said, his voice low, strained. I can't. She sat on the ottoman in front of him, close, too close. She was tired, so tired, and his presence, which had been a source of terror, now felt like the only solid thing in the room. In a moment of pure, unadulterated exhaustion and vulnerability, she leaned forward, resting her forehead against his knee. Just for a second, Nasai. She felt his hand, large and warm, come to rest on her arm, not to hold her, but just there. A simple point of contact. His thumb brushed, once against the soft skin of her inner arm. The small, almost accidental feeling caress sent a shockwave through her entire body. Her head lifted. Their faces were inches apart. His eyes were no longer cold. They were dark and hot, and they were looking at her mouth. Evelyn. He breathed, her name a question. She leaned in. He met her halfway. Their lips were a millimeter apart. She could feel his breath, warm and tasting faintly of tea. She could see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the black, spiky texture of his eyelashes. It was too much. It was too fast. This was a man who had kidnapped her. A man who had enemies who used untraceable poisons. She pulled back, her breath catching. "Who are you?" she whispered, the question desperate this time. "Who are you? Really?" The heat in his eyes vanished, replaced by the mask of granite. The wall was back up. He stood. Abruptly, pulling her to her feet with him, his grip on her arm firm. "I am the man who is keeping you alive," he said, his voice clipped. "Your interview is in 2 hours. Go, get ready. My driver will be waiting for you downstairs." He dodged the question. He let her go and walked to the window, his back to her. A silent dismissal. Evelyn, her heart hammering for an entirely new reason, fled to the bathroom. She showered, the hot water scalding away the last 24 hours, and put on the one good suit she owned, which had miraculously survived the trip in her garment bag. She looked professional. She looked normal. But she could still feel the ghost of his thumb on her arm. When she came out, he was gone. Her portfolio and her bag were waiting by the elevator. A note, on thick, creamy hotel stationery, was next to them. "My driver is downstairs. He'll take you to your interview. He will wait for you. Do not go anywhere else. Do not talk to anyone else. I will see you when you return." There was no signature. She took the elevator down, her stomach in knots. Was she really doing this? Was she walking into the interview of her life after being held captive by a mystery man with murderous enemies? The lobby was discreet, all dark wood and hushed tones. A man in a black suit, different from the ones in the garage, nodded at her. "Miss Brooks, this way." He led her out onto the street. The New York morning was bright, loud, and gloriously normal. Taxis honked, people shouted, the air smelled of exhaust and roasted nuts. Evelyn took a deep, greedy breath. "The car is just here," the driver said, gesturing to the valet stand, where the same black sedan was waiting. Evelyn took a step. It happened in an instant. A blur of motion. A black SUV, coming from the wrong direction, mounted the curb at high speed, tires screaming. It didn't slow down. It slammed directly into the hotel's valet stand, a heavy, ornate marble podium, sending a spray of shattered marble and metal across the sidewalk. The SUV's engine roared, and it reversed, squealing its tires, and sped off into the morning traffic, disappearing in seconds. It had missed her by inches. Evelyn was frozen, her hand to her mouth. Her portfolio dropped on the pavement. People were screaming. The driver had her, his arms around her, shielding her. "Miss Brooks? Are you all right?" Before she could even answer, a new, furious energy erupted from the hotel. Dominic was there. He had appeared from nowhere, his suit jacket back on, his face a mask of cold, terrifying rage. His eyes weren't on the wreckage. They were on her. He stormed across the sidewalk in 3 long strides, grabbing her by the arms. His grip was bruising, his eyes blazing as he scanned her, checking for injuries. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his voice a low, furious growl. "No, it missed me," she stammered, shaking so hard she could barely stand. "It wasn't trying to hit you," he snarled, pulling her against his side, his arm a steel bar around her waist as he moved her back toward the hotel. "It was a warning. It was a message. For me?" He shoved her through the revolving doors, his men swarming around them, forming a protective bubble. He didn't stop until they were back in the private elevator, the bronze doors sliding shut, sealing them off from the world. He was still holding her, his knuckles white where he gripped her arm. He was breathing heavily, not from exertion but from rage. "The interview," Evelyn whispered, her mind still in shock. "I'm going to be late." He finally let her go, stepping back. "You're not going." "What? But you said I could go." "That was before," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "That was before they brought this to my front door. They know you're with me. They know you matter." I don't matter to you," she said, confused. He slammed his hand against the mahogany wall of the elevator. The crack of his knuckles hitting the wood made her jump. He turned to her, his dark eyes burning with an emotion she couldn't name. It was more than anger. It was protective. It was possessive. "You're not a stranger anymore," he said, his voice raw. "You're not a loose end. You're mine to protect. You matter, and you are not leaving my sight." The elevator doors slid shut, sealing them in a box of bronze and silence, and the world outside vanished. Evelyn was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. The scream of the SUV's tires was still echoing in her ears. Dominic had not let go of her. His arm was a steel band around her waist, and she was tucked against his side so tightly she could barely breathe. He was a wall of furious, contained energy. He said nothing until the elevator began its smooth ascent. Then he released her, only to brace his hands on the walls, his back to her, his entire frame vibrating with rage. "You're not going," he had said, and she knew, with a terrifying certainty, that her interview, her chance, her entire future had just been erased. The doors opened onto the penthouse. It was no longer a sanctuary. It was a cage. My portfolio," she whispered, her voice a dry croak. "I dropped it." Dominic's head snapped around. He looked at her as if she'd just spoken a foreign language. "My men will get it." He pulled his phone from his pocket, his movements sharp, angry. He barked orders in Italian, his voice a low, lethal growl. The words were incomprehensible, but the tone was universal. He was a king, and his castle was under attack. "I need to call my mom," Evelyn said, tears finally welling, hot and thick. She'll be expecting a call about the interview." "No," he said, not looking at her. "No phones. Not now." He was pacing, a panther in a cage of his own making. "They are watching. They were waiting." "So what now?" she cried, her voice rising with a hysterical edge. "Am I just your prisoner? What about my life? What about everything? You just ruined everything." He stopped pacing. He turned to face her, his features carved from stone. "They tried to kill you," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "As a message to me, your life was a hair's breadth from being over. So yes, for now, you are my prisoner. Because if you are my prisoner, you are alive. The interview is gone. It's collateral damage. Your life is not." The finality of his words hit her like a physical blow. She sank onto one of the perfect minimalist sofas, the tears coming in earnest now, silent, angry tears for the life she was trying to build, a life that was now shattered on a Manhattan sidewalk. The penthouse, which had seemed so vast and beautiful, now felt suffocating. Two new men, built like the others, were suddenly standing by the private elevator, their hands clasped in front of them. They hadn't been there an hour ago. They were guards, subtle signs of surveillance. The luxury was a lie. It was a high-tech, beautifully furnished prison cell. Later that day, another man arrived. He was older than the others, in his 50s, with silver hair and a face so lean and intelligent it was almost predatory. He wore a suit that was even finer than Dominic's. He and Dominic spoke in the corner, their voices low, the sound of that rapid, angry Italian filling the room again. Evelyn watched them. The older man kept glancing at her, his eyes cold and assessing. He was not looking at her as a woman. He was looking at her as a problem, a variable. When the man left, the silence in the penthouse was heavier. Dominic walked to the window, staring out at the city that had tried to swallow her whole. "Who was that?" Evelyn asked, her voice hoarse from crying. "Luca," Dominic said. "My advisor." "Consigliere," a part of her brain whispered, the word dredged up from movies she'd barely watched. "He doesn't like me," she stated. Dominic turned. "Luca doesn't like anyone. He's suspicious of everything. It's what keeps him alive. It's what keeps me alive. He thinks I'm a part of this, that I'm a trap." "It does not matter what he thinks," Dominic said. "He knows that you are with me. He will protect you as he protects me." He came over and sat in the chair opposite her. He looked tired. The fury had burned out, leaving a deep, calcified exhaustion. "You need to eat," he said. "I'm not hungry." "Eat anyway." He nodded to the kitchen, where a tray of food had appeared while she was crying. He had people, servants, ghosts who moved when she wasn't looking. That night, sleep was impossible. The guest room felt like a cell. She was trapped, thousands of feet in the air, with a man who was equal parts her protector and her captor. The city lights, once a symbol of her dreams, now felt like the eyes of a million strangers, all watching her. She had to know. She had to understand. Slipping out of the bed, she padded barefoot down the dark hallway. The 2 guards at the elevator were gone, replaced by the silence. Dominic's door was closed. She could hear nothing. She was drawn to his study, a room she had only glimpsed. It was all dark wood, leather and books. It smelled like him, that sandalwood and steel. She ran her hands along the shelves. She was a designer. She understood how things were built, how they fit together. She knew a well-made thing when she saw it, and she knew a lie. There, between a row of leather-bound philosophy books, was a seam, a tiny, hairline crack in the mahogany paneling that was just wrong. It was too perfect. She pressed it. A click. She pushed another panel. Nothing. She ran her hand down the molding, feeling for a switch, a latch. She found it. A small, almost invisible indentation in the carved wood. She pressed it. With a whisper of oiled mechanics, a section of the bookshelf receded and slid to the side. Evelyn's blood went cold. It wasn't a room. It was an abyss, a walk-in vault lit by a single cold blue-white light. The walls were not wood. They were perforated steel, and they were lined with weapons. Not just handguns, rifles, automatic weapons. Things she had no name for, all arranged with the clinical precision of a surgeon's tray. On a long black marble counter sat stacks of money, bound in paper. Not thousands, hundreds of thousands, and binders, dozens of black binders, labeled with codes. She stepped inside. Her bare feet recoiled from the cold metal floor. She was in a criminal's lair, a real one. A businessman with dangerous enemies, she whispered, the words choking her. This was not a complication. This was a war. I was wondering how long it would take you. Evelyn screamed, spinning around, her hand flying to her mouth. Dominic was standing in the doorway, his arms crossed. He wasn't angry. He looked resigned, defeated. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "What is this? Tell me the truth. Not the businessman story. The truth." He was silent for a long moment, his dark eyes searching her face, as if memorizing the last moment of her innocence. "My name is Dominic Moretti," he said, his voice flat, devoid of all emotion. "My grandfather was Antonio Moretti. My father was Silvio Moretti. I am the head of the Moretti family. I don't—" "The Moretti crime family. Evelyn," he said, the words hanging in the air, cold and heavy as the guns on the wall. "I am what you think I am. I am the man you should be running from." She recoiled, stumbling backward into the vault. The lie was one thing. The truth was, it was a monster. He hadn't just omitted details. He had lied about his entire soul. "Liar," she hissed, the word full of venom. You let me talk about my mother, about my life. You sat there and acted like you were trapped. You're not trapped. You're a king. This is evil." She shoved past him, her shoulder hitting his chest. It was like hitting stone. She ran, not to the guest room, but to the elevator. She jabbed the button, frantic. "Let me out. I don't care. I don't care if they kill me. I'd rather that than be here with you." He followed her, his steps unhurried, but he got to her before the elevator could. He didn't grab her. He just stood in front of her, blocking her path. "You're right," he said, and his voice was so low, so broken, it stopped her cold. He wasn't the boss. He wasn't the killer. He was the man from the kitchen, the one who wanted to be an architect. "You're right," he repeated, his heart in his eyes. He looked heartbroken. But you're wrong. I am trapped. I was born into this. I was 17 when I saw my father take his last breath, and the men who did this, they put his ring on my finger before he was even cold. I've been trying to make it. Something else. Something clean. But the blood. It doesn't wash off." He took a step toward her. She flinched. "I swear to you, Evelyn," he whispered, his hands clenched at his sides, as if fighting the urge to touch her, to hold her. I swear, I'd burn it all down. This vault, this building, all of it. I would burn it to the ground and walk away, if you asked me to." She stared at him, her mind at war. The man who ordered hits, the man who would burn his empire for her, they were the same person. She couldn't process it. Just leave me alone, she sobbed. She fled, not to the elevator, but to the guest room. She slammed the door, and this time, she turned the lock. The click was loud in the silence. She fell onto the bed and cried, silent, racking sobs that shook her entire body. She cried for her lost job, for her mother, and for the man with the cold eyes and the broken soul who was on the other side of that door. Hours passed. The city grew quiet. The adrenaline was gone, leaving her hollow. And then she heard it, a crack, sharp, sudden and close. Evelyn froze. Her crying stopped. She held her breath. Another crack, louder. And then the zing of something ricocheting, the thwack of a bullet embedding itself in the stone facade of the building. Right outside her window. They were shooting. They were shooting at her room. Terror, primal and absolute, erased every other thought. The lock on her door was a joke. The wall of glass was a target. The only thing in her mind was him. She didn't think. She ran. She tore the door open, her bare feet slapping against the cold hardwood. She ran down the hall to his room, not even knocking, throwing the door open. Dominic. He was already on his feet by the window, peering through the blinds. He was wearing only a pair of black pajama pants, hanging low on his hips, his chest, his back, his arms. They were a tapestry of pale, silvery scars. He was all muscle and coiled power, a weapon himself. He turned as she burst in. "Get away from the window," he commanded. She didn't listen. She just ran, launching herself across the room, propelled by pure fear. He caught her. He pulled her into his arms, spinning them both away from the window, his body shielding hers, absorbing the impact of her terror. He half carried, half dragged her until his back hit the solid wall of the hallway, pulling her tight against him. "Shh," he murmured, his voice a low rumble in his chest. "I have you. You're safe." She was sobbing, her hands fisted in his shirt. No, not his shirt, his skin, his bare skin. She was pressed against his chest, her face tucked into the curve of his neck. He was so warm. He smelled of soap and sleep and something uniquely, dangerously male. His heart was hammering against her cheek, a frantic, powerful rhythm that was thump, thump, thump against her ear. It wasn't the beat of fear. It was the drum of adrenaline, of a man ready for war. They're shooting," she gasped. "They're amateurs," he said, his arms a cage of steel around her, his hand moving to the back of her head, holding her, protecting her. "They're just trying to scare you, to scare me. It's over. They're gone." He was right. The silence of the night had returned, but neither of them moved. The fear was still there, a high, whining frequency in her blood, but it was no longer just fear. It was everything. The terror of the shooting, the adrenaline, the vulnerability of his confession, the impossible, terrifying reality of his bare skin against her. She lifted her head. He loosened his grip but didn't let her go. He just looked down at her. His hair was mussed from sleep. His eyes, in the shadows, were dark, bottomless pits, the emotional vulnerability that had been building for 2 days. It exploded. He lowered his head. She rose on her toes. Their mouths met. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a collision. It was desperate and hungry and full of all the fear and anger and confusion that had defined their last 24 hours. His lips were firm, demanding, and she answered him, her hands moving from his chest, up to tangle in his hair, pulling him closer. He groaned, a low, visceral sound, and his arms tightened, one hand sliding down her back, pressing her into him so there was no space, no air, no lie left between them. The kiss gentled, deepened. It became slow, exploratory. He was tasting her, learning her, and she was doing the same. It was no longer a collision. It was a surrender. He broke the kiss, resting his forehead against hers. His breath was ragged. "Evelyn," he breathed, her name sounding like a prayer or a curse. "Dominic," she whispered back. He watched her, his expression raw, as he slowly, carefully began to undress her. His hands, which she knew could command an army or end a life, were impossibly gentle. He pushed the strap of her t-shirt off one shoulder, his calloused thumb brushing her collarbone, and she shivered. His eyes never left hers, asking a question she answered by nodding, just once, a tiny, terrified, and utterly certain movement. He lifted her, as if she weighed nothing, and carried her from the hallway into the bedroom. He didn't toss her on the bed, he laid her down, following her, his body covering hers, his weight a heavy, comforting, and dangerous blanket. It was a full-body connection, a desperate search for an anchor in a world that had come unmoored. It was the shadows of his world and the light of hers, crashing together in the dark. Sometime before dawn, they fell asleep, not as a captor and a prisoner, but as two people, tangled in the sheets, his arms wrapped so tightly around her it was hard to tell where he ended and she began. The sun was just beginning to cast a gray light into the room when the phone on his nightstand rang, a shrill, ugly sound that ripped the peace apart. Evelyn's eyes fluttered open. Dominic was already awake, watching her. The phone rang again. He reached over, his arm still draped across her waist, and snatched it. "What?" He listened. His face, which had been soft in sleep, hardening back into granite. "No," he said, his voice pure ice. He sat up, the sheet pooling at his waist, his scarred back a testament to the life he lived. Evelyn sat up with him, pulling the sheet to her chest, her heart suddenly cold. "Shut it down," Dominic ordered. He was looking at Evelyn, not the phone. All of it, the ports, the construction sites, the logistics. Nothing moves, nothing, not until this is handled. He hung up, the silence of the room deafening. A moment later, the phone buzzed. A text. It was from Luca. Evelyn could read it from where she sat. "Dominic, this is insane. We're talking tens of millions. You can't halt the entire operation for a civilian." Dominic didn't text back. He just stared at the message, a muscle in his jaw ticking. Then he looked at Evelyn, his expression unreadable. "What? What did you just do?" she whispered. "I'm keeping you safe," he said, his voice flat. In a secure room, miles away, Dominic's men looked at the order. They were in shock. "He's never done this," one of them whispered, his voice full of awe and fear. "Not for his father, not for his brothers. He's never done this for anyone." The silence in the penthouse following his order was louder than the gunshots. Dominic moved with a new, frightening efficiency. He was no longer the conflicted man in the dark. He was the general, and his army, however fractured, had been called to a halt. "Get your things," he said to Evelyn, his back to her as he pulled a black t-shirt over his head, covering the landscape of scars. "Just what you brought. Nothing else." Where are we going?" she asked, her voice a small, timid thing. She was still clutching the bedsheet to her chest. "Out of the city." He was already pulling on a pair of dark jeans and heavy boots. The bespoke suit was gone, replaced by the practical, brutal attire of a man who knew how to disappear. This place is a target now. You're not safe here. I'm not safe here." He tossed her the simple, rumpled clothes she'd been wearing on the plane. "Put these on. We're leaving in 5 minutes." There was no armored sedan in the basement. They took the freight elevator, a rattling steel cage, down to a sub-level garage she hadn't known existed. The air was damp, and it smelled of concrete and old oil. A single vehicle sat in the shadows, not a sedan, but a heavy, nondescript, dark green truck. It was old, powerful, and utterly anonymous. He put her in the passenger seat and threw a duffel bag in the back. The engine turned over with a low, throaty rumble. He didn't turn on the headlights until they were out of the garage, emerging from an unmarked alleyway 2 blocks from the penthouse. The drive was tense, silent. He navigated the pre-dawn streets of Manhattan with an expertise that was both terrifying and mesmerizing. He made 3 stops, pulling into parking garages, waiting, then emerging from different exits, his eyes constantly scanning the mirrors. He was breaking their trail, a tradecraft she'd only seen in movies. As the sun began to rise, they crossed a bridge, leaving the iconic skyline behind them. The concrete and steel gave way to the green, rolling hills of upstate New York. The farther they got from the city, the more the tension seemed to bleed from Dominic's shoulders. He drove for 3 hours, never speaking, until he finally turned off the main highway onto a smaller road, then a smaller one, and finally onto a long gravel path marked by nothing but 2 ancient stone pillars. The gravel crunched under the tires as the path wound through groves of gnarled, silver-leafed trees. Evelyn's eyes widened. "Are these olive trees? My mother planted them 30 years ago," he said. His first words in hours. His voice was softer here. She missed the old country. She said the soil here was all wrong, but she was too stubborn to let them die. The path opened up to a house. It wasn't a mansion, it wasn't a bunker, it was a long, low, stone farmhouse, covered in ivy, with a deep, wraparound porch and a red weathered door. It looked kind. It looked like a home. "This is my mother's," he said, cutting the engine. The sudden silence was profound, broken only by the chirping of birds and the rustle of wind through the olive branches. No one in my world knows it exists. Not Luca, not my men, just me. And now, you. This was the ultimate trust. He hadn't just saved her. He had given her a weapon, his own sanctuary. They stepped out of the truck. The air was clean, smelling of damp earth, wild thyme, and sun-baked stone. Evelyn took a deep, shuddering breath. It felt like the first real air she'd breathed in her life. Dominic, in this place, was a different man. The hard, granite mask of the boss, the coiled predator of the penthouse, dissolved. He unlatched the gate to the porch, the hinges creaking. He walked into the house and, to her surprise, he didn't check for intruders, he didn't scan the rooms, he just entered. He was safe here. The inside was warm, lived in. The furniture was old, comfortable, and mismatched. The kitchen was huge, with a massive wooden table in the center and copper pots hanging from the ceiling. A faint scent of dried herbs and wood smoke clung to the air. Evelyn set her bag down. "It's beautiful." He smiled. A real, actual smile. It was small, a little rusty, but it reached his eyes. She loved this place. Loved, past tense. She passed away 5 years ago, he said, the smile fading. "This place, it's just here." That first day, she saw the man he was supposed to be. He cooked them breakfast, not a servant, him. He moved around the kitchen with an easy, practiced grace, cracking eggs, frying bacon, and brewing coffee that was so strong it was almost sweet. They ate at the big wooden table, the morning sun streaming through the windows. Later. She watched from the porch as he walked out to the vineyard behind the house, a small, overgrown patch of vines. He walked barefoot, his jeans rolled up, his feet sinking into the dark. Rich earth. He was testing the soil, checking the leaves. He was a man who wanted to be an architect, a man who understood how to build things, how to grow things. A child. A little boy of about 6 from a neighboring farm, wandered onto the property, chasing a stray dog. He saw Dominic and froze, his eyes wide. Dominic, who had frozen empires with a single word, just hunkered down, his knees popping. He spoke in a low, gentle voice. "It's okay. He's friendly." "What's your name?" He spent the next 10 minutes helping the boy, whose name was Leo, find his way back home, his large, scarred hand gently resting on the boy's small shoulder. Evelyn felt an ache in her chest, a strange, profound sense of loss for the life this man had been denied. They spent the next few days in that bubble. Time slowed down. The world was the olive grove, the stone house, the warm sun. They talked, not about the mafia or the danger, but about everything. About her favorite colors, about the books he'd read, about her dreams of designing spaces that felt like this house, real, honest, and safe. On the 3rd day, he took her to a clearing behind the shed. He was holding one of the handguns from his duffel bag. Her blood ran cold. What is that for? For you, he said, his voice flat, the boss returning for a moment. I'm not always going to be there. You need to know how to protect yourself. She shook her head, backing away. No, I can't. I hate those things. I hate them too, he said, his voice quiet. But I hate what they do to you more. I hate that you were scared. I hate that you're a target. This is a tool, Evelyn, and it will keep you alive. Please. She hesitated, but she saw the logic, the cold, hard love in his request. She nodded. He taught her. He was a patient, methodical teacher. He showed her how to stand, how to breathe, how to hold the weapon until it felt like an extension of her arm, to steady her. He stood behind her, his body pressed against her back. His arms came around hers, his large hands covering her smaller ones, adjusting her grip. Just like this, he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. His chest was a solid wall against her back. She could feel his heartbeat, slow and steady. Squeeze. Don't pull. Just squeeze. The intimacy was more profound than any kiss. It was the ultimate, dangerous trust. She squeezed the trigger. The crack of the gun was deafening, the kickback jarring, but he was there, absorbing the shock, holding her steady. Again, he said, his voice a low rumble. She did. Again and again. She wasn't a natural, but she was steady, and she wasn't afraid. Not of the gun, not of him. While he worked the farm, she worked the house. She couldn't help it. She found a sketch pad and a pencil in a desk drawer and, for hours, she sat on the porch, redesigning the layout. She wasn't changing his mother's footprint. She was just opening it up. More light, a better flow. She was bringing her world into his, and it felt right. He found her that evening, just as the sun was setting. The sky was a riot of orange, pink, and deep purple. She was curled up on the porch swing, the sketch pad in her lap, fast asleep. He didn't wake her. He just watched her, the fierce, protective feeling welling up in his chest. She looked so peaceful. She looked like she belonged here. Her eyes fluttered open, finding him. Hi, he said, his voice rough. He came and sat next to her on the swing, their hips and shoulders brushing. They sat in silence for a long time, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the olive trees in shades of gold. The connection that had been forged in terror and fire in the penthouse was reforged here, in the quiet, in the peace. It was no longer desperate. It was deep. It was known. She turned to him. He turned to her, in the warm, sunset-lit room of the farmhouse, with the scent of time coming in through the open window. He kissed her. It was nothing like the first time. There was no desperation, no fear. It was slow. It was exploratory. His lips were soft, questioning. His hand came up to her face, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. She leaned into his touch, her hand coming to rest over his heart, feeling its steady, solid beat. He pulled back, his eyes searching hers. "Evelyn," he whispered. "Don't," she said, her voice thick. "Don't talk." She kissed him. This time, she was the one who was sure. Their lovemaking was a conversation, a slow, passionate exploration of trust. It was the feel of his skin, warm from the sun. It was the brush of her hair against his chest. It was the long, slow, deep looks they shared, a full-body connection that was about seeing and being seen. After, they lay tangled in the soft linen sheets of his mother's bed. The room was dark, the moon outside casting silver shadows. He held her, his arm a heavy, comforting weight across her waist. "You know," he murmured, his voice a sleepy rumble against her hair. I was drowning, my entire life. I was in a dark, cold ocean." He kissed her shoulder. You're my light. You're my light in a world of shadows." She turned in his arms, pressing her face into his chest, and held on. The bubble burst 4 days later. The crunch of gravel announced the arrival, and Dominic was on his feet, his gun in his hand, before the vehicle even stopped. Evelyn's heart leaped into her throat. "Stay here," he commanded. But it wasn't a threat. It was Luca. He stepped out of a black, sterile sedan, looking as crisp and out of place as a shark in a vineyard. His face was grim. "Dominic," he said, his eyes flicking to Evelyn, who was standing in the doorway, and dismissing her. "We need to talk. Alone. Whatever you have to say," Dominic said, walking onto the porch, his body language a clear no. "You can say in front of her." Luca's eyes narrowed. "This is a mistake. You're bringing her into this? She is in this. Now, what?" Luca sighed, a long, impatient sound. "Alonzo Fierro, the message at the hotel. It was from him. He's making a play, and he knows about her." He nodded at Evelyn. "He's not just targeting you, Dominic. He's targeting your weakness." The word hung in the air, ugly and sharp. Dominic's face went blank. The boss was back. "Get her out," he said to Luca. "Take her. Put her on a plane to... I don't care, Zurich. Make her disappear. Give her a new life." "No," Evelyn said, stepping out onto the porch. Both men looked at her, surprised by the force in her voice. "No, I'm not running." "Evelyn, this is not a discussion," Dominic said, his voice hard. "This is not a game. This is a mafia war. He will not just kill you. He will use you. He will hurt you to hurt me." "And what do you think leaving will do to me?" she shot back, walking right up to him. "What do you think it will do to you? You'll be looking over your shoulder for the rest of your life, wondering if I'm safe. I'll be looking over mine, wondering if you're alive. I am not your weakness, Dominic." She grabbed his hand, her small, paint-stained fingers lacing with his scarred ones. She turned to Luca. "He's not alone in this. Not anymore." Luca looked from her to Dominic, his expression a mixture of disbelief and a strange, grudging respect. He shook his head. "God help you both." He got back in his car and, with a spray of gravel, he was gone. The tension remained. Dominic was furious, but he was also proud. He pulled her into a fierce, tight hug. "You are stubborn. So are you," she whispered into his chest. The next day, the relative peace was shattered again. Dominic was out in the grove, checking the perimeter. He'd been on edge since Luca's visit. Evelyn was alone in the house, sketching, when her phone, which had been silent for days, rang. She didn't recognize the number. "Hello?" A voice, muffled and electronically distorted, spoke. "Evelyn Brooks." Her blood turned to ice. "Who is this?" "You're asking the wrong questions. You're with a man of secrets. Go to the shed, the one behind the house. Look at the back. There's a loose stone in the foundation. He's not the man you think he is." The line went dead. She was trembling. It was a trap. It had to be. But a loose stone. It was too specific. She had to know. She slipped out, her heart hammering. The shed was old, smelling of rust and dry rot. She went around to the back. There, at the bottom, just as the voice had said, was a single, large, flat stone that didn't quite match the others. She knelt in the dirt, her fingers, trembling, found the edge. It was loose. She pulled. It came free, revealing a small, dark hollow. Inside was a metal box. She opened it. The first thing she saw was a photograph. It was old, faded, a young Dominic, maybe 20, his arm slung over the shoulders of another young man. They were both smiling, laughing, raising beer bottles to the camera. They looked happy. They looked like brothers. Under the photo were newspaper clippings. Her stomach clenched. They weren't about the Moretti family. They were from her hometown paper, Local Woman Battles MS. It was an article about her mother's bake sale fundraiser. There were others, small, insignificant pieces about her graduation, her art prize, and in the margins, dates, recent dates. They weren't just watching her. They were watching her mother. She felt sick. She was still kneeling in the dirt, the clippings in her hand, when Dominic found her. "Evelyn, what are you doing?" His voice was casual, curious. Then he saw the box. He saw the photo. His face went white. "Who is he?" she asked, her voice a dead, flat thing, holding up the photograph. Dominic's jaw tightened. "His name is Alonzo Fierro, the man who's trying to kill you," she said. "The man you were brothers with." "He was my brother," Dominic said, his voice a low growl. He was my father's right hand. He was my closest ally. Until he betrayed us. Until he tried to take everything. And this, she said, her voice shaking as she held up the clippings. Was this part of the betrayal, too? Or is this new? Is this him, watching my mother, telling me you're not the man I think you are? He stared at the clippings, his face a mask of cold, horrified realization. He hadn't known. This was new. I didn't, he stammered. Then who? She cried. Who else knows this? Dominic? Who else knows about my mother? Who knew she was my weakness before I was ever yours? He looked at the box, at the photo, at the clippings, and finally, at her. The blood had drained from his face. The implications, the cold, terrifying logistics were settling in. Alonso Fierro didn't have this level of detail. Someone, he whispered, his mind racing. Someone in my organization, someone close to me, is leaking info. Someone gave him this. The safe house, his mother's sanctuary, his one place of peace, was no longer safe. The enemy wasn't just at the gates, they were already inside. The air at the farmhouse was no longer clean, it was poisoned. The discovery in the shed had shattered the fragile peace, ripping the mask off their sanctuary. Dominic stared at the clippings, his face a mask of cold, controlled fury that was more terrifying than any rage. The man who had faced down assassins now looked truly, profoundly shaken. Someone in my organization, he had said. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Evelyn, her hands still smudged with dirt from the metal box, wrapped her arms around herself. The terror of the anonymous call was fading, replaced by a strange, cold clarity. She was no longer a victim. She was a participant. The phone, she said, her voice sharp. Dominic looked up, his eyes unfocused, still processing the depth of the betrayal. What? The phone call, she repeated, walking toward him. How did they call me? My phone hasn't been on since the penthouse. I only turned it on here because I thought it was safe. How did they know I had it? How did they get the number? Dominic's eyes snapped into focus. The fog cleared, replaced by the calculating chill of the man who ran an empire. He didn't answer. He strode past her into the house, grabbing the hardened, military-grade laptop from his duffel bag. He sat at the kitchen table, his movements economical and precise. He didn't need her phone. He already had the number. It would have registered on his private network the moment it activated. He typed, his fingers a blur. The screen was a cascade of black and green code, things she couldn't understand, but she understood the look on his face. It's a burner, he said, his voice flat. The call was routed through 6 different towers. It's gone. So that's it, she said, her frustration rising. No, he said, his eyes still on the screen. A burner phone is a dead end, but the information, that's a trail. He kept typing. They knew about this house. They knew about your mother. They knew about the flight. They knew you were with me. He stopped. His hands, which had been moving so confidently, froze over the keys. What is it? Evelyn whispered. Access, he murmured, his voice barely audible. To know all those things, you need access to my travel, to my security protocols, to the passenger manifest on that flight. There are only 2 people in the world with that kind of access. You, she said. And Luca, he finished. The name hit the table like a physical weight. Evelyn's stomach plummeted. Luca, the advisor, the cold, assessing eyes, the man who had looked at her like a problem to be solved. No, Dominic said, shaking his head, pushing back from the table. No, not him. It can't be. Why not? Evelyn challenged him, her voice gaining strength. He was there, at the penthouse. He looked at me like I was dirt on your shoe. He raised me, Dominic roared, his control finally snapping. He slammed his fist on the ancient wooden table, making the copper pots rattle. My father was a monster. When he was gone, Luca was the one who taught me how to lead, how to survive. He was my father. He is my father in all the ways that matter. And he's protecting you? Evelyn shot back, unintimidated. Is that what this is? He watched them try to run me over. Dominic, he watched them shoot at my window. He let them get the details about my mother. Is that protection, or is he just cleaning house? The implication was ugly. Luca. Seeing Dominic weakened by a civilian would cut the tie, violently. He's trying to save the family from me, she whispered, the realization dawning. He thinks I'm the disease. Dominic said nothing. He just stared at the wall, his face pale, his entire world, his history, his loyalty, and his love at war. He was torn. She could see the agony of it, the man being ripped in two. She walked to him, placing her hands on his rigid arms. I know he's your family, she said, her voice softening. I know what that means. But my mother, she's my family. And he put her in the crosshairs. He put her life on a bargaining table. Loyalty doesn't mean being blind. Dominic, justice. That's what you've been fighting for, isn't it? To make this all mean something, you can't let him poison everything you are. His eyes, dark and haunted, met hers. He saw no fear in them, only resolve, only light. She was right. He took a deep breath. Get your things, he said, his voice hollow. We're going back. The drive back to the city was a silent, high-speed funeral. Dominic was a statue, his hands gripping the wheel, his jaw set. Evelyn didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. The man she had come to love was on his way to destroy the man who had raised him. He didn't take her to the penthouse. He didn't take her to a hotel. He made one call, a short, coded conversation. He was setting the meeting. He pulled up in a dark, narrow street in a part of the city that felt ancient, all cobblestones and looming, Gothic architecture. He parked in front of a small, unmarked church, a chapel, hidden between two towering apartment buildings. Stay in the car, he said, his hand on the door. Lock it. Dominic, no. This is not a debate. Evelyn, this is my sin, not yours. You wait here. I will handle this. He got out and disappeared into the shadows of the arched doorway. She waited exactly 10 seconds before getting out and following him. She would not be his weakness. She would not be the damsel he had to hide. She was his partner. She would be his witness. She slipped inside. The chapel was vast, silent, and lit only by rows of flickering votive candles. The air smelled of cold stone, old wax, and incense. It was beautiful, and it was heartbreaking. She saw them, at the far end, near the altar. Dominic, a dark silhouette against the candlelight, and Luca, standing there, his silver hair almost white in the glow. As boys, Luca was saying, his voice echoing in the sacred space, we hid here from your father after he had one of his rages. I protected you then. Dominic, I am protecting you now. By putting a target on her mother? Dominic's voice was a low, dangerous rumble. By feeding me to Fierro? By using her? Fierro is a dog, Luca spat. I was using him to scare her off, to show you what this life really is. You were soft. You were weak. You shut down the entire operation for a waitress, a nobody. You were throwing away your father's legacy. It was my legacy, Dominic said, and you betrayed it. No, Dominic, please. Luca's voice broke. He stepped forward, his hands raised. He looked old, tired, and desperate. I did it for you, for us. Get rid of her. Just let her go. We can fix this. I can fix this. Just, like we used to be. We will never be what we used to be. Dominic said. He turned his back. A dismissal. I can't let you... Dom, Luca whispered, his voice cracking. I can't let her destroy everything we built. Evelyn saw the glint of metal first, Luca's hand diving inside his tailored jacket. He wasn't begging for mercy. He was waiting for an opening. He pulled a gun. Dominic! Evelyn screamed. She ran, her footsteps echoing, a frantic clatter on the stone floor. She didn't have a plan. She just moved. She ran toward Dominic to warn him, to shield him, She didn't know. Dominic turned, his eyes widening, not at Luca, but at her. Luca, startled by her sudden appearance, his face a mask of panic, swung the gun. He was aiming at Dominic, but Evelyn was in the way. She was running right between them. "No!" she screamed. Luca fired. The sound was an explosion, a deafening cannon blast that ripped the sacred silence. Evelyn felt a searing, white-hot pain like a burning poker slide across her shoulder. She stumbled, her momentum gone, a sharp cry ripping from her throat. She didn't hear the second shot or the third. She only saw Dominic. He hadn't flinched. The moment Luca's gun had cleared his jacket, Dominic's was already in his hand. His response was not thought. It was reflex, a pure, lethal, protective instinct. He fired, his arm steady, his face a mask of terrible, cold necessity. Luca crumpled to the stone floor, his eyes wide with a final, uncomprehending surprise. The smell of sulfur and smoke filled the chapel. Evelyn's knees gave out. She looked down. Blood, dark and wet, staining her shirt, her hand. "Dominic," she whispered, her voice confused. He was there before she hit the ground. He caught her, his roar of "Evelyn," a sound of pure, animalistic agony. He dropped to his knees, cradling her to his chest, his hands scrambling to cover the wound. "No, no, no, no!" He was sobbing, his voice breaking, his body shaking. He ripped off his jacket, pressing it to her shoulder, but the blood was so much. "Evelyn, look at me. Stay with me, please." She was dizzy. The candles were spinning. It hurts," she murmured. I know. Amore, just hold on." He gathered her closer, his head dropping, his tears falling hot onto her face, mingling with her own. He rocked her, his lips brushing her hair, his voice a frantic, desperate prayer. "Don't you dare leave me, do you hear me? Don't you dare, not you, you can't leave me, not you." He was still chanting it when his men, alerted by the shots, stormed the chapel, their guns drawn. They stopped, frozen at the scene, their boss, the Iron Man, the unmovable object, weeping like a child over the bleeding body of the girl, not 20 feet from the corpse of the man who had been his father. The hospital was a blur of white. White walls, white sheets, the sterile, antiseptic smell that clawed at his throat. Dominic had not left the chair beside her bed, and he didn't know. 2 days? 3? Time had stopped. He was still in his clothes from the chapel, stained with her blood and his. He was unshaven, his hair matted, his eyes red-rimmed and raw. His multi-million-dollar empire was imploding. His phone buzzed, endlessly, on the bedside table. Frantic texts from his lieutenants about Fierro making a move, about the power vacuum. He ignored them all. He just watched her. He watched the steady beep, beep, beep of the heart monitor. He held her hand, his thumb rubbing small. Useless circles on her knuckles, as if he could physically will his own life, his own strength, into her. He had refused meetings. He had refused food. He had refused to sleep. He had done nothing but sit there. His entire formidable being focused on one simple task, waiting. He must have dozed, his head dropping forward, because a small, faint pressure on his hand jolted him awake. He snapped his head up. Her eyes, her beautiful, warm, hazel eyes, they were open. They were fuzzy with drugs and confused, but they were open. "Evelyn," he breathed, his voice a gravelly ruin. She tried to speak, her lips cracking. He was there in an instant, a cup of water with a straw, his hand shaking as he helped her. She took a small, painful sip. "Hey," she whispered. A sound, half sob, half laugh, tore from his chest. He slumped forward, his head landing on the mattress, his shoulders shaking with the force of his relief. He brought her hand to his mouth, kissing her palm, her fingers, tears tracing paths through the stubble on his face. "You're okay," he whispered, his voice thick. You're okay." She used her good hand, the one not attached to an IV, to weakly, so weakly, touch his hair. "You look terrible." He laughed, a wet, broken sound. He sat up, wiping his face, not caring about the tears. He just held her hand, holding it in both of his, as if it were the only thing keeping him tethered to the earth. They sat in silence for a long time, the only sound the steady beep of the monitor, the morning light, pale and hopeful, began to fill the room. He finally spoke, his gaze fixed on their joined hands. "I'm done," he said, his voice quiet, but with a new, strange finality. She just watched him, waiting. "The family," he clarified, finally looking her in the eyes. "The business, the legacy. It's poison. Luca was right. It destroys everything it touches. It destroyed him. It almost destroyed you." He took a deep, shuddering breath. "I'm walking away. I'll give it all up. All of it. I'll sign it over. We can go to the farmhouse. We can go anywhere. I don't care. I'll burn it all down." He leaned in, his eyes, so full of pain and desperate hope, locking onto hers. Just stay with me." Evelyn stared at him, at this powerful, broken man, offering her the ashes of his kingdom. She saw the man he was, the man he could be, and the monster he was terrified of becoming. She squeezed his hand. Her voice was weak, but her words were strong, hitting him with more force than a bullet. "I never asked you to stop being who you are," she said softly. "Just stop being who you're not." He frowned, confused. I don't understand. I don't want a civilian," she whispered, a small smile touching her lips. "I don't want you to run. I don't want the boss. I don't want the man who inherited his father's sins." She touched his rough cheek. "I want the man who grows vines," she whispered. "I want the man who sat with me in the kitchen. I want the man who taught me how to shoot and the man who held me when I was scared. Stop being the monster. Dominic, stop being who they made you, and just be the man I see." Her words in that quiet hospital room had been a key. Stop being who you're not. He had been a son, a boss, an heir, a monster. He had never, not once, been allowed to be Dominic. In the week that followed, the underworld watched, stunned, as Dominic Moretti did the unthinkable. He didn't just walk away, he systematically, methodically, and legally began to dismantle the Moretti empire. He was not a boss abdicating his throne. He was a surgeon, cutting the cancer out, not just from his own life, but from the city. He placed the clean assets, the shipping, the construction, into a blind trust to be managed by a neutral third party, a firm of ruthless, bloodless lawyers who had no allegiance to any family. The dirty assets, the ones built on blood and fear, he simply liquidated. He sold the properties. He closed the accounts. He cut the lines of supply. He was burning his own legacy to the ground, just as he had promised her he would. The underworld was in chaos. His lieutenants, men who had pledged their lives to him, were adrift. Some were furious, seeing it as the ultimate betrayal. Others, the ones who had seen him cradle Evelyn in the chapel, understood. They quietly took the generous severance packages he offered and vanished. He was severing every tie, one by one, until he was no longer a king, but just a man. And through it all, Evelyn was his anchor. From her hospital bed, she held his hand while he made the calls that undid a century of power. She didn't flinch. She just watched him, her eyes full of a fierce, steady belief. But one man didn't see a new beginning. He saw a power vacuum. Alonzo Fierro, the man who had been Dominic's brother, saw his moment. With Dominic's organization in chaos, Fierro saw an opportunity to take it all. But first, he had to remove the one thing that had caused this, Dominic's weakness. The day Evelyn was discharged from the hospital, the air was thick with a tension that had nothing to do with her recovery. Dominic was there, his face calm, his suit immaculate. He looked like the man from the plane, but his eyes were different. They were alive. They were focused. "You ready?" he asked, his hand resting on the small of her back as she sat in the wheelchair, her arm in a fresh, clean sling. "Ready," she said, her voice strong. The hospital was secure. Dominic's last remaining loyalists, men who were protecting him, not the family, were everywhere, invisible in plain sight. But Dominic knew Fierro. He knew he wouldn't make a move here. It was too clean. They were in the subterranean parking garage, the same black truck from the farmhouse waiting. When it happened, not a hail of bullets, not a screaming SUV. It was quiet. It was professional. A black van, a simple, nondescript delivery van, screeched around the corner, cutting them off from the truck. The side door slid open. 3 men, all in black, all masked, jumped out. Evelyn screamed, but Dominic hadn't moved. He wasn't surprised. He was waiting. "Now," he said, his voice calm. And from the shadows of the garage, his own men emerged. It was an ambush, but not for them. The firefight was short, brutal, and contained, but it was a distraction. "Dominic!" A voice called. A 4th man, one Evelyn didn't recognize, had come from the other side, from the stairwell. He grabbed her, yanking her out of the wheelchair, his arm locking around her throat, a gun to her temple. "It's over. Moretti?" the man snarled. "Tell your men to stand down, or she dies." Fierro hadn't sent his men. He'd sent one man, the one he could trust. The rest were a diversion. Dominic, his own gun in his hand but lowered, went still. He looked at the man and at Evelyn. Her face was white with terror, her good hand clawing at the man's arm. "Let her go," Dominic said, his voice a low, lethal promise. "Drop the gun, Moretti, or I swear to God." Dominic's eyes met Evelyn's. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. "Squeeze. Don't pull. Evelyn!" In a surge of pure, desperate adrenaline. Squeezed. She drove the heel of her free hand, not at the man, but at his gun hand, jamming it upward just as she had been taught. The gun went off. The shot was deafening, the bullet burying itself in the concrete ceiling. It was all Dominic needed. He didn't fire. He moved. He crossed the 10 feet between them in a single, fluid motion, a predator uncaged. He didn't go for the man. He went for her. He grabbed her, yanking her free with a force that sent them both sprawling to the pavement. The man, his plan shattered, scrambled. He didn't try to shoot again. He turned and ran, back to the stairwell. Dominic was on his feet instantly. "Stay here!" he roared at his men, who were securing the others. "She doesn't move." He was gone. Up the stairs, after the last ghost of his old life, Evelyn, her heart hammering, was surrounded by a wall of black suits. She could only stare at the stairwell door. The chase went up, past the sterile floors of the hospital, up past the admin offices, until the man burst through a final door, onto the rooftop. He stumbled, gasping, into the cold, windy night. He was trapped. The New York skyline, a river of diamonds, surrounded him. He turned, his gun raised, ready. But Dominic was not there. "You always were a coward, Alonzo." Dominic's voice came from the shadows. From behind a massive air conditioning unit, a new figure stepped out. Not the man who had grabbed Evelyn. This man was tall, charismatic, and his face was a mask of furious disbelief. "Dominic." Alonzo Fierro breathed. "You sent your men to die," Dominic said, stepping into the dim light. He was unarmed. He had tossed his gun on the stairs. This was not a hit. This was an exorcism. "You sent them for her. You came for a woman with a broken shoulder. She broke you," Fierro screamed, his voice cracking. You were a king, and you gave it all up. For her. You're nothing. You're weak." He raised his gun. "I was never weaker than when I was with you," Dominic said, his voice quiet. "When I was my father's son. When I was your brother." He took a step forward. "Stay back," Fierro warned, his gun hand shaking. "She's right," Dominic said, taking another step. "I'm not my father. I'm not the legacy. I'm not the monster you wanted me to be." "I'll kill you," Fierro shrieked, his composure gone. "I'll kill you, and I'll kill her, and I'll take it all." He lunged, not to shoot, but to run. He tried to get past Dominic, to get to the door, to escape. Dominic just shifted. He didn't grab him. He just blocked him. Fierro, in his panic, stumbled backward. He scrambled, his expensive Italian shoes finding no purchase on the gravel-topped roof. He hit the low, concrete parapet. He teetered, his arms windmilling, a comical, terrifying ballet. His eyes, for one last, long second, met Dominic's. They were wide, not with hate, but with a final, pathetic, all-consuming terror. Then he was gone. His scream was a thin, fading ribbon of sound, swallowed by the city, by the wind, Dominic walked to the edge. He did not look down. He just listened. He listened until the city, the sirens, the wind was the only thing left. He closed his eyes. He let the wind wash over him. He let it all go. The legacy, the hate, the blood, the past. He turned and walked back to the door, back to his future. When he got back to the garage, Evelyn was on her feet, his men a respectful, silent circle around her. He was covered in sweat, his hands shaking, his clothes torn. He walked through the circle. He didn't say a word. He just opened his arms. She ran into them. He held her, his face buried in her hair, his entire body shaking with the come down. "It's over," he whispered, his voice a raw, broken thing. It's done. It's over." They drove to the hotel hideout, the first place he had ever taken her, the first place he had ever truly seen her. The sun was just beginning to rise, filling the massive penthouse with a clean, morning light. They were both bloodied, both shaken, but they were alive. While he showered, she made tea, her good hand moving with a slow, steady purpose. When he came out, a towel slung low on his hips, his hair wet, she was waiting. She looked at him, at the man who had been a myth, a monster, a captor, a lover, and a savior. She looked at his body, the body of a warrior, the pale, silvery network of scars that covered his back, his chest, his arms, each one a story, each one a price he had paid for a life he never asked for. He stopped, suddenly self-conscious, and reached for a shirt. "No," she said, her voice quiet. She walked to him, her bare feet silent on the floor. She put her teacup down, and she touched him. She traced the long, jagged line on his shoulder. "Who did this?" she whispered. "My father," he said, his voice rough. "I was 15. I spilled his wine." She didn't flinch. She just absorbed it. She pressed a soft, gentle kiss to the scar, a kiss of acceptance, a kiss of healing. She moved to the puckered, round scar on his side. "This one?" "Fierro," he said, his jaw tightening. We were ambushed. He saved my life, and I saved his. I thought we were brothers." She kissed that one, too. She kissed his legacy. She kissed his pain. She kissed the man he had been, and the man he was. "You are more than the legacy you inherited," she whispered against his skin. "You are more than their sins." He was shaking, not with rage, but with a profound, earth-shattering release. He looked undone. He sank to his knees, not in defeat, in surrender. He knelt before her, his head bowed, his hands resting on her hips. He was the most powerful man she had ever known. And he was on his knees, not with a ring, not with a promise of wealth, but with a single, unvarnished vow. He looked up at her, his eyes so dark and finally so clear, full of a raw, beautiful light. "I had nothing," he whispered, his voice thick. "I was a ghost. I was an oath. I was a name. And then you fell asleep on my shoulder." He pressed his forehead to her stomach, his arms wrapping around her waist, holding her. "You saved me," he choked out. "You saved me in that moment. Evelyn, you saved me before I even knew I was lost." Months later, the sign on the bright, airy, downtown studio was simple. E. Brooks Design, inside. The space was flooded with light, with clean lines, rich fabrics, and an energy that was all her. Evelyn moved through the space, her arm completely healed, her limp gone, a pencil tucked behind her ear, pointing, laughing, and commanding a team of draftsmen. She was a creator. She was a boss. The studio had been funded by an anonymous donor, a grant from a foundation no one had ever heard of. But Evelyn knew. That night, she locked the studio and walked the 6 blocks to her apartment. It wasn't a penthouse. It wasn't a farmhouse. It was a simple, beautiful, pre-war brownstone with a big kitchen and a fireplace. She walked in, the smell of garlic and tomatoes greeting her. "Hey," a voice called. Dominic was in the kitchen, his shirt sleeves rolled up, a faded apron tied around his waist, his hair a little longer than he used to wear it. He was stirring a pot of sauce, a glass of red wine on the counter. He looked happy. He looked normal. He had vanished. The papers, the underworld. They talked about the mystery of Dominic Moretti, how he had simply walked away. He was a ghost story, a legend. Here, in this kitchen, he was just Mark. The new name on their lease, the man who taught a night class in architectural history at the local college, the man who met her at the door, wiping his hands on his apron, and kissed her. A long, slow, deep kiss that tasted of wine and home. "Bad day?" he murmured against her lips. "The best," she whispered back, wrapping her arms around his neck. The final scene was 6 months later, an airport. Evelyn stood in the jet bridge, her new portfolio in her hand. She was nervous. It was her first big solo pitch, a hotel in London. She walked onto the plane, looking for her seat, first class, this time. She'd paid for it herself. She found her Rao, and she stopped. He was already there, sitting in the window seat, reading a heavy, leather-bound book. He looked up, that small, rusty smile, the one that was just for her, touching his lips. "You're late," he said, his voice a low, happy rumble. She smiled, the nerves, the past, the fear, all of it melting away, leaving only this, only him. She slid into the seat beside him, her head, this time, finding his shoulder with a purpose. "I guess," she whispered, as she laced her fingers with his. "Some flights really do change everything. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We hope you enjoyed the journey with Evelyn and Dominic. Where in the world are you listening from? Let us know in the comments below. We love hearing from our community. If you love stories like this, please be sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. And finally, share your thoughts in English about the story. What was your favorite part? We cannot wait to read what you think.